Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Friday, December 29th. This is day 84 since October 7th. I wanted to start by giving a little bit of an update on the Egyptian peace deal. It was just reported that Hamas said that they're ready in principle to resume talks over the hostage release. According to Qatar, who reported and told Israel that Hamas is ready in principle. So it's possible talks will be resumed on the release of future hostages held in Gaza in exchange for a 2-week-long pause in fighting. Again, if you're interested in that Egyptian proposal, it's a 3-part proposal. I've talked about that in recent daily reports. Significant news, South Africa said that Israel failed to prevent genocide in Gaza, and they have requested the start of the International Criminal Court of Justice proceedings, which is the principal judicial organ of the United Nations. So that was just announced today. They have filed an application instituting proceedings against Israel over alleged violations of its obligations to prevent the genocide of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. According to a press release, the application states that since October 7th, Israel has failed to prevent genocide and has failed to prosecute the direct and public incitement to genocide. Israel strongly rejected this with disgust, saying that it's flood libel and that South Africa's application to the UN top court is, quote, lacking both a factual and legal basis, and it constitutes a despicable and contemptuous exploitation of the court. South Africa, in fact, it continued and said South Africa is cooperating with a terrorist organization that is calling for the destruction of the state of Israel. So there will be more about that in the news, I am sure. The World Health Organization also said that hundreds of thousands are sick in Gaza, that between mid-October and mid-December, because of the lack of potable water, because of the lack of electricity, people are living in shelters, have continued to fall sick, which means close to 180,000 people are living with upper respiratory infections. More than 136,000 have diarrhea, with half of those being children under the ages of 5, 55,000 more cases of lice and scabies, more than 5,000 cases of chickenpox, 42,000 cases of skin rash, and close to 5,000 cases of impetigo, 4,600 cases of acute jaundice syndrome, and 126 cases of meningitis. There are significant reports in the news about sicknesses in Gaza spreading and how soon those will lead to increased death. A humanitarian aid update, the Kerem Shalom crossing, that's the crossing from Israel into Gaza, was just reopened. I don't actually know, I didn't realize that it was closed, so it must have been closed the last couple of days, but it was reported that 103 humanitarian, medical, and food aid trucks, in addition to 4 trucks carrying domestic gas fuel, those 103 trucks went through Rafah, in addition to 32 injured people who left to get medical aid, and then 79 trucks were prepared for their inspection and entry from the Kerem Shalom border. So that was just in the last 24 hours. Some updates from Israel and from the Haaretz newspaper. Israel's reported that they've killed dozens of Hamas fighters in the area of Khan Yunis over the past day. They're continuing their ground operations, their bombing campaign. The Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza said 20 people were killed and 55 in an attack on Rafah in southern Gaza in the last day. In addition, 187 Palestinians were killed in the last 24 hours, according to the health ministry. A delegation of Hamas officials is scheduled to travel to Cairo to give its observations about that Egyptian plan that I started out with. And also, on an unrelated issue, there was a preliminary investigation by the Israeli Defense Forces after an airstrike this week on Gaza's Maghazi refugee camp, which revealed that the bombing damaged buildings were not targets and resulted in civilian casualties. So that's quite significant because that is an Israeli Defense Force investigation stating that an airstrike had a disproportionate effect on civilians. There are concerns and significant news about we've been hearing about this, of course, the northern border with Israel. And the concern is that rather than just clashes with Hezbollah in northern Israel and southern Lebanon, that could escalate to, a more formal war. Israeli officials have said there's a very limited timeline for diplomatic resolutions to the conflict with Hezbollah. Netanyahu met with 30 representatives of families of hostages held by Hamas and said that they're holding talks for the release of abductees even at this moment. It was announced that Judy Weinstein Haggai, who was thought to have been alive and held captive, she was a 70-year-old American Canadian Israeli, and in fact, she was killed on October 7th. She was a part of kibbutz near Oz, and it's believed her body is being held by Hamas in Gaza. Joe Biden announced that he and his wife are devastated by the news of Judy Weinstein Haggai, the American Israeli's death, and they have pledged to do even more and continue to work to bring the hostages home. Hundreds protested in Tel Aviv against the war in Gaza, calling for an end to the fighting, the release of those held hostage there, and calling for an end to the occupation. This is quite significant because there is not an appetite or attitude by many at all in Israel to call for an end to the bombing campaign and the incursion. It's quite significant to have any resistance to the war because the majority of Israelis are supporting the campaign against Hamas. So that just happened, that protest in Tel Aviv. There also were demonstrations outside the Knesset calling for the release of hostages. So protests are continuing in Israel. And the Israeli army just published findings on the accidental shooting of those 3 hostages in Gaza, revealing that one of them, Yotam Haim, was shot to death about 15 minutes after the other 2. It was just announced by the Netanyahu government, the far-right finance minister, Smotrich, said that as long as he continues to serve in his position, Israel will not transfer tax money to the Palestinian Authority. This constitutes collective punishment. Tax money is collected directly from Palestinians in the occupied Palestinian territories, then goes to Israel before it's distributed to the PA. This is not unprecedented. We've seen this before, but it does constitute collective punishment in the West Bank. We also know that the far-right national security minister in Israel, Ben-Gvir, said he will appoint a new Israel prison service chief, which violates the coalition deal that brought together the wartime emergency government. You might wonder, why am I talking about all these details of the Israeli government? But what's important to know is that this is showing a crack in the Israeli wartime government, which means that the coalition is weakening, and it's possible that it might not be able to stay together much longer. The war cabinet did meet in Israel to discuss the post-war future of Gaza, but that was postponed at the last minute. According to the Israeli Defense Forces, Israeli fighter jets attacked launch sites and a Hezbollah military compound in Lebanon in an extensive strike. Hezbollah claimed they shot and neutralized most of the Israeli army's observation devices on the border. And so escalations on the northern border do continue. Syria reported that 2 Israeli airstrikes near Damascus occurred in the last several hours. This again is on Friday. And according to reports from Saudi Arabia news sources, the Iran's Revolutionary Guards, 11 members of them were killed in an attack near the Damascus International Airport in Syria. We also know that 4 Israelis in their 20s were wounded in a car ramming attack near the West Bank city of Hebron on Friday afternoon. 2 people were wounded in a suspected stabbing attack near the Masmoria checkpoint south of Jerusalem. So things are escalating in the West Bank. And a 38-year-old Palestinian was killed by the Israeli Defense Forces near Bethlehem on Thursday, and another man was critically wounded on Friday. Naftali Bennett, the former prime minister, wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal calling for direct action against Iran and confirmed that a drone base uh, had been destroyed by Israel. The US, France, Germany, and the UK released a joint statement condemning Iran's increased production of uranium, enriched uranium. And Iran claimed on Friday that it executed 4 saboteurs linked to Israel's Mossad intelligence service. Houthis, the US said it shot down one drone and a ballistic missile in the Red Sea. So that Red Sea activity is continuing. And the US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin spoke to Israeli Defense Minister to discuss the war in Gaza, citing the need for increased humanitarian aid, but also threats to the broader regional security. The UK reported that there's an increased number of hate crimes that have increased quite drastically. And France has said that they will bolster their New Year's Eve security with 90,000 police officers set to be deployed because there have been such increased tensions over the war in Gaza. So a lot is happening. That is the update for the day. Continue to pray for peace, continue to call for a ceasefire. And we will continue to keep you informed as we work together toward peace.